Uh, Hello, my name is Nancy Campbell, and I'm the program director for the Independent Film Festival of Boston. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome all of you to the virtual edition of our Fall Focus and to introduce tonight's guests for our opening night film, Minari. We are joined tonight by writer-director Lee Isaac Chung, who directed this tender, semi autobiographical film that you just watched. Many of you, like myself, would probably have to take a few moments to compose yourself after such an emotional journey. Lee Isaac Chung made his directorial debut in 2007 with Manurangabo, which premiered at Cannes. Minari is his fifth feature and has been recognized with a number of awards for its excellence, including the U.S. Dramatic Grand Prize Jury and Audience Award at Sundance earlier this year. We are also delighted to have with us actor, writer, comedian, self-described geek, and cinephile, Paul Sun-Hyung Lee, who many of you may know as Appa from Kim's Convenience, CBC comedy series, a great ensemble comedy series. He originated the role on stage and has taken it to the small screen, and with that has also garnered a number of awards, including 2 Canadian Screen Actor Awards for Best Lead Actor in a Comedy Series. Welcome to both of you. We are so excited to have Isaac and Paul with us here. For me, as a half Japanese person, this is something that I had communicated to Paul, who grew up in New Hampshire in the 80s. This film really resonated and spoke to my experience as the daughter of an immigrant in a community that was not very diverse, that a lot of people didn't know much outside of the dominant culture. All the characters in this film feel like people that could be related to me and other people that I know, and really pulse with an authenticity. At times it also evoked some of my favorite films by my favorite director, Yasujiro Ozu, who did some very gentle family portraits, and also kind of reminded me of films that as a kid I thought were for adults that specifically actually dealt with the hardship and struggles of American farmers, films like The River and Country and Places in the Heart. As a programmer and a film fan, I love to see these, I really love and admire films that take these concepts and recenter narratives to include those that are not traditionally represented in mainstream films and television, and bring those stories to broader audiences. I'm really excited to hear Paul's thoughts about the film and his questions for Isaac. But I was wondering if, Isaac, you might start us off by talking about the genesis of this project. And after making 4 features, what made you decide to tell this story?
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. Also, thank you just so much for having me at the festival. This is a great honor. But to answer your question, I had made a few features, and they kind of took me all over the world in a way. And I felt in a way that I was getting a little bit lost in what I was doing and what I was out to do as a filmmaker. And maybe around 2011, 2012, I just kind of wanted to have a reset of what I want to do. And around that time, my daughter was born as well. So I took some time away from even doing anything with film, and wanted to focus on watching different types of films and writing different ideas, and also just being a dad. So I think it was in around 2018 that I started to read Willa Cather, who she wrote My Antonia, which was very influential for me. And she had this quote where she said that her life really began, basically as an author, her life began when she stopped admiring and she started remembering. And I kind of felt like that's what I had been doing this whole time. I'd just been admiring. I'd been looking at films that I really like and wanting to emulate them. And instead, I wanted to do something that's very personal, and that speaks to my experiences, and something, and create something that I could just pass on to my daughter as well. She at that time was around 5 years old, and I started to think a lot about my perspective when I was a 5 year old, and what I saw. And I remembered, that when I was five, my dad moved us to this trailer home in the middle of nowhere in Arkansas and said, "Hey, this is your new home. This is where we're gonna start a new life." And my mom had not heard anything of this. Like, she had no idea we were going to move to that farm. And I just remember that moment and that immediate conflict, and just thought that's an interesting genesis to a project. And I did what Willa Cather was saying about remembering rather than admiring, and I just started to jot down a lot of memories. And I got down to, I looked down at my page. I had about like 80 memories, and they ranged from, showing up at the trailer home for the first time, thinking that a tornado was going to come after 2 weeks, to a fire that eventually happened that my grandmother set off on our farm. And so I kind of knew like the trajectory of the story, and I started to write in a way that could make that story cohere, and inject like all the things that I was thinking about with life, and being a dad, and all these different things into it. So that's basically how it started.
So Paul, I'm very curious about your reaction to the film, when you watched it.
Yeah, no. Well, I'll tell you, the first time I ever saw a trailer for the film was a couple of weeks ago, actually. I
Mm.
hadn't heard of it, and all of a sudden somebody just dropped the trailer and had shared it, and immediately there was something so hauntingly familiar about it. It gave me chills. This was a reflection of my family that I had very rarely seen, especially up on the big screen. Um, we're doing a show here called Kim's Convenience, and it's a lot of the same parallels about that. It's an immigrant family just basically trying to make their way in foreign society, basically. And there's that generational sort of gap between the kids and the parents. And but Minari is so different just because it was very much my childhood. It felt like there were so many strong echoes of it. And when I finally got a chance, when I was approached to watch the film, I approached it with much glee. I was very, very excited to see it. And in fact, we're shooting season 5 of Kim's right now, and my schedule's like all over the place and totally busy. And I had to carve out time to watch it. So I watched it very late at night, just before the link expired, and I had to process it. After it was done, I was it it brought back so many emotions for me, a lot of flood of memories as well. It's interesting that you talk about
Mm.
memories, because so much of that was so familiar, like these recurring themes in my life growing up as well, as a
Mm.
child of immigrant parents whose father was very strong-willed and very proud and very desperate to try to make something succeed for a better life for all of us. And so these themes just sort of um, it unearthed a lot within myself as well. That there's a lot to unpack of it. I loved the poetic nature of your storytelling. I love that the characters just were so familiar and so real. And I love the fact that I saw my parents and my childhood reflected in such an authentic way up on the screen. And it was
Thank
just
you so
such,
much.
oh no, thank you. Honestly, as it's very rare when you see your parents or your own life sort of reflected up, especially as a Korean. I'm a Korean Canadian, but like as a Korean North
Mm.
American, to see that because we're so underrepresented. And before then it was always just MASH. That was the closest,
Hmm.
and even then it was like Koreans, yeah, during the Korean War,
Yeah.
and it was a sitcom, and it was one of those things where watching your film was just such a highlight for me, because it felt like you got it right, and it was just I'm still processing it
Oh,
later.
yeah. Thank you so much. That means so much to hear, Paul. That's incredible.
Yeah,
It,
no, I'm literally I'm sort of still flabbergasted because there are moments in that film that are haunting me still, that I still that I'm replaying, and it's just there's things that I had forgotten from when I was a kid,
Mm.
that it evoked. It's just sort of like still waters, and at the bottom you just sort of stir the bottom up, and then out of all the sediment comes these really a lot of really wonderful memories too, but some painful ones as well, and ones that you don't
Sure.
that suddenly with the hindsight of age and perspective you kind of understand now. Oh, that's why my appa acted this way, and that's why Oma was so upset. And wow,
Yeah.
the stuff I said as a kid to my harmony and harboji, that was really crappy, right? It's that
Yeah.
perspective of knowing like from the other side. And so I love that. I love that.
Yeah, it was honestly the whole writing process. It was just filled with excavating in a way. Like I was remembering things, and then that would cause me to remember certain things. And every now and then I'd call my mom and dad, and they didn't know what I was working on, but they just thought, "Wow, Isaac is really interested in that era of our our lives." Because I would ask them, little details of like, why did grandmother, like, what did she do in order to come? And then I learned that, oh, she actually she sold her store in Korea and came with a lot of money to give to our family. Just little things like that that I learned about the backstory. So there was yeah, it wasn't all just in my mind, I guess. It felt like there had to be an investigation process. And then once we started filming and preparing for the shoot, all the actors are also contributing their own memories. Like Yoon Jung, that was her excellent idea of doing the chestnut where she takes a bite and she offers it because she remembered that when her mother came to watch her kids while Yoon Jung was living in Florida for a time, that the mother had done that. So I just thought that's wonderful. We're going to put that into the story. And then our production designer was Korean, and she just remembers that era and had lots of different things that she knew had to be in the film. So little details of what would be in a Korean home. We wanted to get that right, so that anyone who's watching it who's Korean American would say, "Oh yeah, I remember that rice cooker," or I remember that thing on the table. So yeah, it was a lot of fun to do those things, to pay attention to those details.
I think it's really interesting how you don't spend a lot of time trying to make this world totally accessible for an audience that is not Korean to enter it. That it is so authentic, and I think that that's what makes it a better experience, is because you don't spend that time to kind of like dumb it down so that like everyone can enter the room. That like you kind of have to just jump in and immerse yourself, and I think you as an audience that's much more challenging. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about those choices that you made to make this world like so completely authentic?
Yeah, I guess one of the challenges, and Stephen and I, we would talk a lot about this, was that we didn't want to make a film that has to, where we feel like we're having to explain ourselves to a majority culture audience. So in other words, we're not trying to tell Americans, quote unquote Americans, like, this is the Korean experience, oh, this is the reason we did this and this and this, but instead just explore who are these people as people in the sort of life that they're actually living, and just trust the idea that this is an American experience. This is exactly what tons of Americans go through. And what's been fascinating is just to hear other people, whatever background, coming up and saying, "I think I had the same grandma you had," or, I totally understand your parents' struggle, and our parents had that, even though they're not even Asian. It seems like there's something universal about that. So yeah, it was tough. We weren't sure, for instance, about using Korean for a while as well. But even that came out of that process of saying, no, we want to keep this accurate to what that experience is really like, rather than just wanting to explain the experience, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Can you
I,
talk? Oh
sorry.
no, Paul, please.
Just speaking to that too, I was delighted that it was in Korean, and you kept it with subtitles, because that just added to the authenticity for me. Kim's Convenience, we speak in accented English a lot of times, and really,
Hmm.
in reality, Appa and Oma, the characters that we portray, would be speaking to each other in Korean all the time. The only time we would be speaking in English would be for the benefit of customers or others who are non-Korean speaking. And that's a big argument, not an argument, but a discussion that the producers and Ince
Mm,
Choi, who's the co-creator, had as well, because there's that fine line between accessibility and authenticity that you have to sort of that
yeah,
to walk, especially if you're portraying another culture in the media and you want it to be a little bit more accessible in that
yeah.
sense. And that's what I loved about Minari was it just you stuck with the truth of what that situation was. And there's something so again, and you spoke to it as well, the universality of the family dynamic about trying to succeed and trying to fit into a different culture, and the use of language in that sense was just so spot on and perfect. um, and I think audiences, savvy audiences, understand that and they crave that. They don't
Mm,
want everything spoon fed to them because so much has already been sort of diluted down into the easiest sort of consumable fast carb type thing to ingest. And audiences really, I think they're craving that full immersion where they actually have to use some of the brain cells, but you're so true to the storytelling that it's easier for them to to see themselves reflected in it, their own family dynamics reflected in what they see in the screen. And the language
mm.
might be different, but the motivations are the same and recognizable. And that's a testament to your storytelling between you, the writing, and the actors and the directing. It was just again, bravo to that.
Oh, thanks so much, Paul. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I do think it is kind of a dilemma in trying to figure out that language aspect, and I can see it going either way and see the pros and cons of both. Um, but yeah, I was surprised that we could go this way, and A24 and Plan B were fully behind it, and then also to see that audiences would connect to it, and hopefully that does open doors to this concept that hey, we don't have to just have English language films to have an American film. Like we could have American films that show other experiences and other languages being spoken. That'd be wonderful.
Do you can you talk a little bit about like where you shot and the casting process? Because I think that it's such a fabulous ensemble, and I think that obviously in Asian communities, family is really central to our lives and our values, and I think that this is a film that is so about this family, and no one really kind of takes it over. It really is about everybody. And
Yeah,
I think that
yeah.
that is really very beautiful, like how balanced that story is. And for me, it also reads as a love letter to your parents, to all of our parents in a lot of ways. I think that like all of us are Generation X. We are at that age where, we can now understand with more complexity the struggles that our parents
Yeah.
endured and went through. And we have a lot more sympathy for who they were at times, like when we were children, when we thought that they were being harsh with us, when in fact it is a grand show of love, oh, what their actions were towards us, that we could not fully comprehend their
Oh, for
motivation.
sure. Yeah, even I mean, just on the last part that you're saying, I started to see more of myself in my dad in like just pursuing film in general and thinking about my dad pursuing farming and just how strange that might have looked from the outside. But then what I'm doing with my life felt really absurd and irrational. Uh, and of course, my family, my wife and daughter are having to bear the brunt of that sort of unstable desire and pursuit. So I was kind of relating a lot to what my dad must have gone through in the process. But yeah, one of the things when I was writing was that I thought I want each individual in this film to have their own story, and the story is really about your individual pursuits versus the pursuit of the family in a way, and that conflict that arises when you have these individual concerns and the family concern. Um, and I wanted to show like two different love stories within it, like the son and the grandmother being one love story, and then the mother and father being the other love story. So seeing these two relationships kind of ebb and flow, and then finally reach a reconciliation at the end. So that was the idea. In terms of the casting, one of the big things that I did that was helpful was that I had this family portrait where I filled in all the faces as we're casting. And yeah, something just clicked with all of these actors when they were all together. I just thought, this looks like a family, and it looks like a family that I just want to love. Like I want to root for these guys. And Steven came on board first, and that was a no-brainer, honestly. When he said he was interested, I mean, there was no way to. I just knew he's the right person for this, and that he's gonna kill it. And then there was a friend in Korea who was helping me. I was living in Korea last year, or a couple of years ago, and she was helping me cast the Korean leads of the mother and grandmother. And these two actresses were acquaintances of hers. And of course, I knew of the grandmother because she's a famous actress in Korea. And Yeti, she is an up and coming actress, and I hadn't seen any of her works. But when I just met with them and talked to them, I mean, it was an instant knowing that they were just right for the film. It's really hard to describe. Like I just knew that they were the perfect fit for it. And then when I got back to the US, we started casting the kids, and we had a casting agent who sent out a casting notice all around the US, and we had all these tapes of Korean kids who could speak English and Korean fluently sent in to us. And we were watching those nonstop. And the boy, he was the youngest of the submissions, Alan Kim. And he was the one I just kept gravitating to. Like all the other kids, there were lots of kids who were very skilled, and I could tell that they're very talented, but there was something about Alan where every time I watched him, it would just crack me up. So I'd have a bad day, and my wife and I would say, hey, let's watch that Alan kid. And we'd watch his audition, and it was hilarious. And we brought him in to audition with Steven, and Alan was incredible when it came to being in the presence of another actor. We realized that that's the special way for him to unlock his performance. So on set, we just made sure to create the atmosphere for him, and we called him our James Dean, because we never knew what he's going to give us, but he's kind of the star, and we're creating this sort of environment for him to do his thing. So yeah, he did an amazing job. And then Anne, or Noelle, who plays Anne, she's also an older sister, and when she started to interact with Alan during the auditions, I mean, it was like an instant. It just felt so realistic. Like she was already telling him what to do, and giving him sisterly advice and all those things. So that's kind of how the casting process happened. I think you asked about the location. We shot in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is about 2 hours from where I grew up in Arkansas. So we tried to go as close as we could to the place where the story is set, where we could also find crew and all those things. And that happened to be Oklahoma.
It's wonderful. I mean, the cast that you have it feels like a family. It feels very, very authentic. What is it like working with someone who was her name, Yun, who's the grandmother?
Yun Yeah.
She is wonderful comedic relief in this film.
Yeah.
And like her and the little David, Alan Kim, is together are like really the relief that you need.
Yeah.
When you're balancing out the emotions of this film. Like you give us that whole range of a lot of sentimentality, a lot of like struggle, a lot of hardship, but you also give us the real relief of that relationship, and they're the best comedy duo I think I've seen in a long time.
I think they could go on tour. That's what I told them.
Yeah, I think that they definitely could. But she's such an established actor. What was it like for her to work on an independent film in the United States and not, be a big star in Korea?
Yeah, she jokingly complains a lot about the sacrifice she made to come and do my little movie. But I mean, I love her to death. She's like a mom to me now, and she's incredible. She has acted in over 80 films and television shows, and the shooting schedules in Korea can be quite fast and quick. So there's this thing that she does where you just tell her what the scene's about, and I don't know how she just nails it with the first go. And you know, if it's funny because if somebody wants like 3 or 4 takes, she's like, "What are you looking for an Oscar? What's going on?" Like, you know, she's so no nonsense about it. She's like, "All you need is one take." And
Wow,
yeah, she was just incredible, a true professional. So it was a highlight for me to get to work with her.
that's amazing. Paul, do you have any questions that you can think of about the film? And you know, because part of what I love about a film festival setting and why we do it is just seeing people compare the craft, really. You know, as somebody who's not part of the craft, I'm a viewer, I'm a voyeur. I love hearing people like both of you, very talented in both of your arenas and in the same field, talk about what you admire about each other. I think that that is a wonderful thing. So if yeah,
Yeah, no. Yeah, sure. One of the questions one of the things that I really actually quite loved about Minari was um, the the way the direction the story went into and how you didn't dwell on certain things that are very common to the immigrant experience. And one of them is racism. Uh, and I was quite happy to just sort of that you sort of lightly touched on it with, and in, the closest it ever got was the scene at church where the kids were asking those questions. And it wasn't done out of a sense of malice. It was just ignorance and just curiosity. And I
Hmm.
kind of like, I found that refreshing because I find that a lot of stories that people are sharing with themselves growing up, there's a lot of the same sort of elements that happen. And it's, you know, one of them is like, okay, it's the racist moment at school or at church or at work and or on the farm, or you know, when the family's considered the other and they're given a hard time by the
Hmm.
townspeople or whatnot. And what I really loved about Minari was the fact that in terms of the storytelling, the vast majority of the characters were very supportive to the family in that sense. Will Patton, I loved his character of Paul. You didn't know where he
Yeah.
was going to come from. And then when he starts speaking in tongue in that first scene, uh, that was that really just sort of snapped me back because my parents growing up were very involved in the church and they still are. And
Mm.
they followed this interesting pathway through the different denominations from Anglican to Catholicism to born again Christian to Pentecostal, like all over the place. Um,
Mm.
so I guess you were saying earlier on you wrote a whole list of memories and you sort of you found a way to connect them through the writing of the story. Was there a conscious effort to just sort of sidestep that? Because I'm wondering if you did. I mean, I'm sure you did. At some your family did experience that, and what was the reasoning ab- around perhaps even sidestepping some of those tried sort of tropes or
Mm.
issues that come along. And I'm quite glad you did because there's a gentleness to the storytelling and a really sort of uplifting sense to it that I found quite refreshing as somebody who when you watch a movie about themselves, you know, we've all been down that other road before. So I liked the positivity, I guess, in terms of your storytelling.
Well, I appreciate that, Paul. Um, yeah, you know, growing up in the South, I think one thing is that yes, I've experienced racism, and racism does exist. Like I don't think that we can deny that. But at the same time, I think there's another type of reality that exists that maybe we don't dwell enough on, where that racism doesn't exist. You know, where there's actually quite a lot of connections that happen between people that you wouldn't expect. Like my dad and this person who Paul is based on were actual good friends in Arkansas, and he was our local Pentecostal guy who would drag across around on the local roads, and somehow he and my dad became really good friends because they both felt like they understood each other for their outsider sort of qualities, and I always thought that that's quite interesting, and with this film, I thought it'd be great if we present a portrayal of people where they're not these this immigrant family, they're not defined by their oppression. They're not defined by racism, and at the same time, the people who have been living there aren't defined by that either. But instead, it's more just this humanity, and they find connections and how they're equally human. And yeah, I don't know. It's not easy though, because that can always go into the territory of, is that utopic? Are you coming up with this vision of America that isn't true? I mean, I don't want to deny that there's no oppression or anything like that. And I don't know, Paul, how do you deal with that yourself and in your work? And
Yeah, it's the same, and it's a challenge because especially with the climate of what's been going on
mhm,
lately too, it's a charged topic,
yeah,
and we're up in Canada and we're just a little bit more polite about it. It still exists here. We like to pretend it doesn't,
mhm,
but it does, and it's one of these things where it's a very interesting um, dilemma to have to whenever you're telling stories and trying to stay authentic to the stories. Is what is the tone of the story? And I loved what you said about not having the family defined by their oppression, or not having the townspeople defined by being racist or what they've done. And we need to acknowledge, yes, it's there, absolutely, but that doesn't mean every single story needs to be about those particular topics. And
mhm,
that's what I really truly did love about the uplifting nature of Minari. Was that was, it wasn't the focus of the story. It wasn't necessary to that story that you were telling. And that's why I found it quite refreshing, because, I saw the trailer and I saw the barn on fire and I thought, oh my God, what's going to happen? And
uh-huh.
immediately it's like a dog whistle. You kind of go, oh, racist people, they burned down
Yeah,
they burned down
I've
the
heard some people
soldier.
respond in that way. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And when you find, I don't want to spoil it. Well, everybody will have seen this movie, who's
Who's
watching
watching
it.
this?
And yeah, so they'll see it's Sunja who does it, and she was just trying to help.
yeah,
And it just, all those pieces, and that's what I found so refreshingly beautiful about your story, and the positivity of it too. And I loved, when David's sleeping over at his friend's place for the first time, and then the friend's dad sort of shows up, and you're thinking, oh, here it comes. It's
yeah.
the
Hmm.
racist dad who's gonna, say something, and he's like, "You help your father out." I love
Yeah.
that. I just love that because it comes back to the family dynamic. It's just, it doesn't matter how they look. It's, how's your dad doing? They doing it right? Help your
Hmm.
dad. Be a good boy. Um,
Yeah.
I kind of like to. I would love to think, and it's a utopic way of thinking. It's a very hopeful way of thinking. But that's what I loved about it, was there's so much hope in Minari, and that's a message that really, we don't have enough stories like that. And it doesn't remove its powerful. It doesn't make it less powerful because you're not dealing head on with things that are actually out there. Um,
Mm.
so
That's
I
that's
mean,
so moving to hear. Thank you, Paul.
oh
That's
no, thank you again. I can't thank you enough for this too. And it's so, what I love too is it's so well crafted. Your writing, the structure of the story, it's beautifully done, and it breathes. It's one of these movies that really, you allow the characters in the story to breathe and play out. There doesn't feel like there's a rush to get to this point, to this point, to this point. Page 30,
mm.
it's got to reach this climax or this or that. It didn't feel like that. It just felt so organic. And
Oh, that's so great.
yeah,
Yeah, thank
watching
you.
that is a treat. It's a treat. It's an absolute treat.
It is. It's a wonderful film. I think that you touch a lot on the hopefulness. I think that what's important and important about both of your works is about representation and having the opportunity for people who fear others to see people who look different from themselves in situations that are very familiar to them, so that helps to remove their fears that people are different from themselves, because most people at heart really just want all the same securities. They want love, they want
Hmm.
a home, they want a family by them, and a safe place to sleep, and some security in their life. people want the same things. And by seeing more representation and more stories like this, we have that opportunity to spread that, and spread empathy and compassion. I think that your film is so wonderful. It is all the things that Paul just described. It does have a lot of air in it and lets things move at a pace that really makes you appreciate all of the small gestures inside of it. And, you know, I can't recommend it more highly. We are super excited for everybody who is seeing it for this. I was very excited to share it with Paul, because I think that Kim's Convenience is doing a wonderful job of, you know, bringing smiles to people's faces. But I think that you've taken it on a very, very epic journey through the human heart. And, you know, I think that we're all super grateful for that. I should probably wrap us up a little bit. I think we're getting to the end of this, right? Yeah. But, you know, I've been really appreciative and grateful to have both of you here. We're so excited to get the word out. And I guess I'm speaking now to the audience that may be watching this and saying, tell everybody about this film. This is a film that should be recommended to anybody that like has a heart, you know. And in this climate, in this time, we need more stories like this to remind us of our basic humanity and how we can generate empathy amongst ourselves, and form stronger communities just by like allowing representation and allowing everybody who lives near you to have a voice and be visible. Is there anything that anybody would like to add or conclude with?
I'm really humbled you all are talking about the film in that way. So yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you both so much for joining us.